the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup for Friday, June 16th, 2023. Our hosts, Josh Clayman, David Brill, and myself, Ron Quaranta of the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance. As always, a busy week, lots to catch up on. Josh, what is going on?
So, I think what's been on many people's minds is the House Financial Services Committee hearings earlier this week. That was something. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Ron and David, about what went down.
So I'll start. I didn't watch the entirety of the hearings because as exciting as House committee meetings are, I tried to get through as much of it as I could. That being said, it was a good mix of interesting perspectives. Obviously, the big elephant in the room was the recently approved Prometheum special purpose broker-dealer approved by the SEC. The co-CEO presented there and had commentary very much in line. And David, I'm going to say it, that had a lot of Chair Gensler's talking points that seem to mirror and echo his statements. I don't know the gentleman. I don't know Prometheum. I don't know anything about him. But that really kicked off this kind of cacophony of industry participants saying, what the heck? It's, almost a supporter of the SEC is the one who finally gets a special purpose broker-dealer license. And the industry is saying, but wait a minute, we've been trying for a long, long time. There's more to it. There's a lot to dive into there, David. But what were your thoughts?
Well, one thing was, coming from Fort Lauderdale today, and it's been hot here, and I believe it was Congressman Flood who really heated up the Prometheum, co-founders with his commentary. And I think what's really important to remember is, they were able to get us, this special purpose broker-dealer, but they can't trade any of the current tokens, Ethereum, Bitcoin, or the large crypto assets on that platform, because they don't have permission to do it. And the only tokens they really can trade, as I've read, is security tokens, of which there are very few. And so I think while one could view it as a positive step that a special purpose broker-dealer was approved, a special purpose broker-dealer being approved that can't trade Bitcoin and Ethereum is really a very limited value right now. And Josh, how did it strike you?
Wow. So there was a lot going on. I didn't get to see every bit of it. I think a few things. One was it really hit home the importance of the process of passing new laws and really hearing from people who have tried, who have in good faith tried to get answers and haven't always been able to. I think it's really important that we have this process and that we have these hearings and that we have outreach to Congress and others. I think another thing is, it's important that we build regulatory bridges and not regulatory moats. And I think there was a really great thread on Twitter by Rodrigo of Paradigm, where he called out some of the very points, David, that you were talking about actually the limitations and how, in terms of a path forward for everyone and for the industry, perhaps, as great as it may be to get a special purpose broker-dealer across the line, that it's in no way a solution and that we need to keep working towards solutions for the industry. Ron, what do you think?
Before I respond to that, and I agree with you in great measure, I want to apologize to everyone here at the WSBA bunker in central New Jersey. Apparently there are dark clouds looming and I look like I'm in a cave. So apologies to everyone. So Josh, I think it's a good point. And again, not knowing the folks at Prometheum, there's a lot of immediate impact by different perspectives in the industry, right? Those who were deeply involved in crypto and working hard to get approval from the SEC and often complain about the SEC acting in good faith, came back with the idea that how did they get this so quickly? I don't want to minimize the effort that they took. As I understand it, it did take them several years to get to this point. And there's been this news cycle of, well, let's dig deep into Prometheum. What kind of broker-dealer are they? There's these. I don't want to speak to any of that. What I do want to speak to, and I think it's an important part of the conversation, is irregardless of whether or not they get a special purpose broker-dealer license, David, to your point, there's really not much that they're going to be able to trade. We've seen the memes of people showing pictures of empty vending machines saying this is the Prometheum solution. And again, no disrespect to that team, don't know them at all. But I think it also goes to something the industry has said. Irregardless of the special purpose broker-dealer license that they received, fundamental questions are not answered by this.
Yeah.
Vis-a-vis crypto and whether or not they're securities and the SEC's position. And it really feels a bit disingenuous. And I know it sounds like I'm going to beat up on Chair Gensler again, but it feels a bit disingenuous to point to the Prometheum example as the shining star, here's how it should be done. It doesn't answer fundamental questions. And I'm assuming you both see it the same way.
Yes, I do, Ron. And one thing I also want to say about the hearings is that I certainly appreciate the Republicans taking the mantle for these crypto and blockchain issues. And I would like to see it become more of a nonpartisan issue. And so one of the things I'm wondering about is, how do we get some of the elected officials on the Democratic side to become more open to the technology and what it accomplishes? I still wonder if there's a real understanding about the nature of which, access to the blockchain and blockchain-related products are really open to anyone who can access. Anyone has access to these different blockchains. It's really just pointing to them and, go on Etherscan or other ways to track what's going on a blockchain or a specific crypto wallet address. And so I really just wonder what needs to be done to get more support from the Democrats in the Financial Services Committee, on this issue.
I'm going to put my cynical hat on, and this comes from us talking to a lot of colleagues in DC. I agree with you, David. There's the educational component, and we've had the privilege, all of us, of being in DC. WSBA is not a lobbying organization, but really trying to educate with voice of industry. Here's what's happening in banking and finance. But there is a palpable sense that they just don't want to know because it doesn't fit the narrative that crypto is bad. There is a strategic ignorance that is pervading how these things are moving forward in Washington. And I know that sounds very cynical, but without that ignorance, the SEC can approach it the way they have approached it. Non-supporters in Washington of crypto can shout from the rafters that it's all bad, and it fulfills their mission. And I think that's a hard road for all of us to hoe in this space.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think this is why the adversarial process is so important, because a lot of these decisions, so far we just have allegations, right? And these are things where it's important to have the other side, and it's important to rely upon the courts as well. Not that we should give up trying to pass new laws. We absolutely shouldn't. And people are working hard across the industry. But just in this situation, with what you guys are talking about, I think it's important to have the two-pronged approach. I will say one thing that really, really did concern me, actually, was when Gary Gensler, when he talked about we don't need a new digital currency, we have the dollar. I mean, one of the things I will say about that is, what does that have to do with securities? Nothing. To me, that is sort of almost like a tipping of the hand. The regulation is supposed to be technology neutral. It's not supposed to be merit regulation, right? It's a disclosure regime. And so I think it's very important, again, that people continue the strong efforts that they've been doing in good faith.
That statement to me was the real tell out of all of the public conversations that the chair has had or non-supporters in Washington of crypto has had, and that's a frightening thing. And the reason that is frightening to me, and you're right about merit-based, that's the government picking winners. And I'm not necessarily saying that we blow up all incumbents. Look, this is an opportunity to leverage both the underlying technology to evolve global markets and to continue, in the United States' instance, to make the U.S. a world leader in financial markets. But that comment to me was the government picking winners. And that history shows us that doesn't work well.
And also, looking at our financial markets, people need to realize that if we suddenly ban a lot of these crypto products in the U.S., people in the U.S. want access to these products. And if they can't access them in a regulated or more controlled environment in the U.S., they are going to go and access them overseas. And we've already seen these with different exchanges, and it will continue. So it's really better to have a regime that is comfortable to people here and has some protections for people here, rather than the folks that do want to access blockchain and crypto projects just going offshore onto exchanges where there's even less regulation or even less ability to have some action if something were to go wrong.
I wanted to raise one more thing out of the House Financial Services Committee testimony that I thought was interesting, and it really does substantiate a conversation all of us have had. A lot of members, all three of us, and I was pleased to hear it, although it makes me realize there's no quick solution. Testimony, actually, they had noted that the UX, the user experience for crypto, is still not easy. David, to your point about wider adoption, yes, people want this, but it's not easy for them to have it. So to me, there are two things that are happening here. One is the industry is not really doing a good enough job. And I know there are builders out there building, and the three of us have seen them, but the user experience for everyday people just isn't there. And that's a problem. And the other item I wanted to raise about that, which now escapes me frighteningly, but I think, David, Josh, did you see that as well? This idea that we're a long way from a user experience that makes sense for people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been an issue for a long time. I think, I guess one of the, I mean, it's a big thing that we need to solve. But yeah. I do think though that some of the issues that we're commenting on, like even, just in the past few days with the, we had the due date this week for the comments concerning the SEC's proposed rules regarding expanding the definition of exchange, the reopen comment period. It expired on the 13th. And I think those sorts of things, I mean, I think that the user experience, I forget exactly where I was going with that, Ron. I'm having the same experience.
I've only had 2 cups of coffee too.
But there was something I was going to say about that. But I think it's escaping my mind at the moment.
Well, I think to build on that a little bit as well, the other thing that is interesting, and Josh, you referenced this a bit earlier. I don't want to minimize how critical this is. We brought up that some of these will be decided in the courts, and everyone's aware of the famous court cases that are at. We've been talking about Ripple for 2 years. We now have Binance and Coinbase, and there are facts and circumstances in each of those cases. But I don't want to minimize the impact that will have on the industry, because those court cases do not happen quickly. Right. And the other one of the conversations that we have at the WSBA with colleagues and members in this space is, what do we do for the next 18 months or 2 years, for example, where these court cases may or may not be decided? And my response is, look, builders keep building. And I think that's an important thing. But I think the other side of that is this may not come out the way you want it to. Careful what you ask for, and we have to be prepared for that as well. David, did you see that out of the hearings, and what are your thoughts as well? And one quick thing real quickly, keep the comments coming. Dr. Vogel and Tuan, thank you for that. Others, please continue to send your questions and comments. And I missed my disclaimer, so obviously for everyone watching, nothing discussed is accounting, investment, legal, or tax advice. My lawyer's friend have taught me well. Josh, David, did you see the same thing? What are your thoughts on this kind of where courts go?
Well, one thing I want to talk about with the UI UX for a minute is that, and Tuan makes an interesting point of, it won't evolve. His view is that it won't evolve, and firms won't invest in it if they feel like they're becoming, under regulatory scrutiny. But I'd say the bigger point is that that's been an issue, and we've talked about it for quite a while. I've talked about it for quite a while, that the UI UX needs to improve. And, I still know people, every time that they send any amount of crypto, meaningful amount of crypto from one crypto wallet to another, they still send test amounts across. And,
as do I.
The blood still flows a little bit for some people I know when they send, something meaningful from wallet to wallet. And that will have to change. And I think it's getting a little better, but there's definitely room for improvement and for it to evolve. And look, I think the better we can do it, the better it will be for adoption, because I think there's really a younger cohort who are still really in crypto. And I think the older cohort has been trailing behind the comfort level with using crypto beyond maybe buying it on a platform that they're used to. The court cases have been interesting. And, I've referred to this before in the Voyager case, where Judge Wiles had some very specific rulings regarding the commission with regards to not putting evidence before the court. And then, asking for specific relief, which he didn't grant based on the fact that they didn't put anything in evidence before him. And I think that the judiciary is really going to be that sort of umpire in the middle here who is going to look at the facts and rule, based on the facts and the law and how they see that. And I think this is really a great place where we have a check and balance between, Congress and the judiciary. So I think in my mind, it's working right now.
Yeah.
The scales of justice take time. These cases are long and complicated, and they're going to take time. And so I think, the judicial process is working as it should. It's hard for all of us to be patient because in the meantime, there's been real effects on the business. One thing also, while we talk about the judiciary, is I was just disappointed to see the commission call out a number of different token projects in the Coinbase and Binance complaints. And I think the real issue for me is it really feels like a little bit of a drive-by shooting for some of these token projects. The token projects that are named, if they don't have an active complaint against them, really have to, move the court to get involved in the case to actually defend themselves. And I don't know, while it may not be illegal, I think there's a real due process issue in that these projects should have had a chance. If the commission thinks they're a security, they should have brought a complaint against those projects and given them a chance to have a full dialogue rather than have one or two paragraphs about the project in a complaint and thereby create this inference that since the SEC is saying in court papers that these projects are securities, now there's an inference out there that these projects may be securities.
Yeah.
And the knock-on effect is that a number of these projects, the value of the tokens went down substantially, some 10, but most 20 to 30% over an 8-day period. And that's really, that's not good for American consumers, and that's not good for how the market works itself. And, I look at like a stock analogy. I can't ever recall, a company where, allegations are made in a secondary complaint, suddenly saying that, major things wrong with a company were ongoing without, making that complaint against the company.
Yeah.
And so even in insider trading narratives, that's not usually how it works. So I think this is a disappointing aspect to this and something that's definitely affected the altcoin market.
David, let's stay on the price movement if we could, David and Josh, and commensurate with that, I almost want to feel, did the crypto market take a bit of a double whammy on the Fed decision as well? And I was surprised at the hit BTC and Ether took for a variety of reasons, but David and Josh, I'd love your perspectives on that.
Sure. So when we look at the pricing, the big hit really came with the naming of these additional tokens and the potential that Binance in the US may have to halt operations. And what people don't realize is it's kind of a knock-on effect because not only is it the exchange, but if market makers feel that they are market making tokens that may be considered securities, they have to revisit their ability to market make it, at least in the US. And that dries up the liquidity in the US. And what we saw over last weekend was real drop off in prices for a lot of the altcoin tokens, as well as, Bitcoin, Ether a little bit. So I think there's been a knock-on effect here in the US by these allegations, and companies are looking at, well, how do I deal with these tokens? There's been an allegation made they're securities. Do I need to delist them? You saw Robinhood delist 4 tokens. So I think when you're, some forced selling, some questioning by, intermediaries, whether they can work in these tokens, had a knock-on effect. And I think adding to your point, Ron, the second part of it was the Fed pausing, but saying they're still open to raising rates is not good for crypto and not good for risk assets.
Not the Fed's brightest shining moment in the press release world. And certainly I'm not here to criticize Chair Powell, but they've, and I know it's not an easy job, but not the best in the way of market signals in a way. Josh, I know you're probably a long buy and hold person, so you're probably not looking at price action, but I know you spend a lot of times talking to issuers or builders in this space. What has their perspective, and we'll go totally going off script, Josh, but what has their perspective been to the extent you could speak about it from these market drops in tokens, and is it affecting how they do business in the building that they're building, the things that they're building?
I mean, I think the builders keep building, right? Yeah. If you really believe, if you're a true believer, if you believe in the technology, if you believe in the future of Web3, if you believe that this is I think what drew many of us, probably all of us on this call, is the promise of innovation and of just moving to the next level with technology and with commerce and with all kinds of things. And I think if you're focused on that, that hasn't changed. If you're focusing on the long term, then that's, keep your eyes on the prize, right? Business as usual. Keep on building. I do think some of the back to what David said about the kind of like, as he described it, the drive-bys on the tokens. I just think it's so important that people realize that statements that are made in complaints, they're allegations,
Yeah.
right? And just like when Chairman Gensler gives a speech or someone gives a speech, that's a view. That doesn't mean that that's what the law says, and that doesn't mean that that's what the result will be. So I think that's important that people bear that in mind. By the way, I did have a memory of what I was trying to get at with user experience and the rule, but I was thinking of the different rule. So rather than the one that was just due about expanding the definition of exchange, those comments, the other one with respect to the proposed safeguarding rule that the SEC had proposed that people provided comments to later. Some of the takeaways from some of the comments, including, I believe, from the WSBA comments as well, right? That this actually, the net effect of pressuring a small number of qualified custodians to cover way more assets if this were passed, is that it puts things back in the hands of the individuals as opposed to professional investors, professional advisors, right? And while, yes, it is totally true, not your keys, not your crypto, that's important.
Yeah.
I think that is where there's risk with the user experience. And that is a driver for why, that's what I was getting at about the importance of having the user experience.
It is a good point, Josh. I want to address Dr. Vogel's comment, and I'm going to read it verbatim to the extent I can. At the moment, crypto are not traded in a real market and not even based on real USD, but on funny money stablecoins. David, I know you and I have had many, many conversations, and I suspect we would both wholeheartedly disagree with Dr. Vogel's perspective, and I suspect several of the centralized exchanges that have worked hard to be compliant and not been able to get to that point would disagree with as well. And isn't that exactly what the SEC is about to fix? I would push back and say I don't know that the SEC is interested in fixing anything. David, what are your thoughts on that comment with respect to Dr. Vogel? And I get the perspective. We hear it a lot, but that's not what we're seeing in the space.
Well, and also, like, if you think about it, a lot of the pairs are in US dollars. So I don't think they're funny money unless you think our US dollar is funny money. And some people do think our US dollar is funny
That's a
money
political conversation.
with all the, printing of money, but I'm not going to take that view. Look, USDC is backed by assets that are audited, that are well known. Tether is a presence. Some people do worry about what Tether is backed by, but I guess the best thing I would say is that you're not hearing anybody have an issue with moving USD into dollars. I've not heard of anyone having an issue redeeming Tether as of this moment. It's not been in crypto Twitter and the press. So I don't think of it as funny money right now. And I think of it as different trading pairs. And I think ultimately here in the US, these exchanges all have dollar pairs. And as long as you have dollar pairs, it's the same pairing that you would if you were to buy securities on a different type of market. So exchange. So I don't see it the same way, but I appreciate his view.
I do as well. Yeah.
One thing I do want to say, and then I'll jump to you, Josh, is that, I think the trading that that does go on, I think the spreads are narrow before all this occurred. And I think there's an ability to, have efficient markets.
Go ahead, Josh.
So I was just going to say, to the extent that Dr. Vogel in the comments is getting at transparency and disclosure and things like that, I mean, I think that's something that's important, right? And I think many projects are doing that. So if you look at, what happened post Silicon Valley Bank, with the great disclosures really that Circle gave about USDC, right? I think there are there are disclosures, there are players doing good things, there are regulated um, regulated activities, where people are providing disclosures. That's what I mean by that.
I think you go ahead, David.
No, I think another point people are forgetting. Look, and I know disclosure is a bit of a thorny issue here when we talk about blockchain tokens versus, standard securities here. But the blockchain projects, the blockchain by its very nature is it's open and accessible. I don't think there's a lot of asymmetry of information on blockchain projects. And I think that whole idea of disclosure, where you may have individuals that have market moving information for security, is really a lot different than blockchain based products where you're seeing what they're doing in real time.
Yeah.
And you see what announcements they make, that you see their roadmaps, you see what gets implemented, and you can follow the foundation's Twitters, and they give updates. So I don't really feel that there's this asymmetry that does exist in the stock market.
David, Josh, thanks. Dr. Vogel's follow-up comment, please check reported volumes, 90% or more in stablecoins. I will fully dig into the archives with the team and pull up all of the data sources that we have. Yeah. Another user would love to share more offline to explore the opportunity to build the case for an American sandbox. Josh, there's that word again, sandbox. Drop us a note. We're always happy to have that conversation. info@wsba.co. Pardon me. Our prior comment, Josh and David, gets me to that next provocative headline that I wanted to throw out for both of you, and I wanted to talk about it. Is TradFi the savior of crypto? And a lot of people are pointing to the recent S1 filing by BlackRock of a spot Bitcoin ETF. I'll predict that the SEC is going to decline it, but I would love to hear your thoughts. Does TradFi come to the rescue? And no one wants to answer that.
No, well, look, I worked on one of the first ETF filings back in 2016, and look, I think it's really how you view things. Like, I don't view some of the reasons that were given for previous denials. Like, I don't know that the commission is going to say things have changed when it comes to market manipulation and surveillance. Like, I don't know that those issues in their mind has been resolved. I think in most of the public's mind, they're comfortable with that. And I really think that, having an ETF is a more efficient way to enable regular investors to, buy and sell and get exposure to Bitcoin, for some of them then going on an exchange and buying some. And so, like, I almost feel like this is really a more elegant approach, whether it be BlackRock or one of the other, fund providers that offer it, really to give people exposure to it. So in some ways, a no to this kind of filing is really just a no towards wanting the broader public markets to get access to Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, so I agree, David. I think, when we think about the reasons that have been given, lack of market surveillance, insufficient, those sorts of things, I've always thought that actually maybe it was more like you were saying, which is that they don't want people en masse to be entering the market, right? That there is some effort to try and keep it in parallel. But again, it brings back to the question of what's actually riskier for people. Isn't it riskier for people in some senses, like risk of actual loss, but also understanding the market, being able to, on-ramp, off-ramp quickly and effectively, that sort of thing. I think that's something where, if you're just one day deciding I'm gonna go do something, it may be a lot different than somebody who is knowledgeable, and has and can kind of guide you, right, the way that we use for other. But may I answer your question, Ron, about TradFi?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting because, on one hand, you could say, is TradFi going to save crypto, right? Or you could say, is crypto going to save TradFi? I feel like, there's a lot that works both ways. And maybe for certain people, they may be persuaded by some of the familiar TradFi names, right? Yet, I think what we're seeing is that TradFi is excited about digital assets and about the opportunities that it brings, and ways to expand. So I actually think in general, well, who knows how it will be with this ETF, and whether that will be finally the one that gets through.
Yeah.
But I do think in the long run, digital assets is revolutionizing so many things and is a plus to TradFi.
Yeah, and in our experience, the three of us know that most major banks, many brokerage firms, institutional investors are spending quite a bit of time looking at digital assets and crypto assets and digital tokens and broadly tokenization as well. I'll suggest, and I don't go doing predictions a lot, this will get declined as all others simply because it goes against their stated policy, which is they do not want broader access and exposure to any of this, including Bitcoin. And I know that sounds a bit more provocative than I want it to be. But I suspect it'll just be another decline, and we'll be back a little bit to that drawing board. We're running up on time a little bit, but I did want to dive into a couple of things. Again, for the audience, thank you for joining us. Please do keep the questions coming. One of the other things that came out in the kind of conspiratorial realm for a long time, the crypto industry has been looking for the Hinman documents. It sounds like the Watergate papers at this point, where material from former Commissioner Hinman, I think going back to 2017 or 2018, vis-a-vis Ripple and vis-a-vis crypto have finally been released. I don't think it was the big win either side thought it would be, but it did in my mind talk about kind of this bifurcated perspective within the agency, within the commission itself about crypto and what is or isn't a security. David, what did you take out of the Hinman documents?
Well, in the first instance, I'm about transparency, so I'm glad that some subset of the documents were shared. Look, I think the conversations internally just highlight the fact that there are differences of opinion amongst the different members of the departments in the commission at that time, and just a prevailing view. And so I think, if nothing else, it rebuts this idea that everything's a security and it's just clear as day, because you had some, thoughtful people in the commission taking different views on it. And so I think from that perspective, the transparency is good. I think showing that there are differing views on it is good. I don't know that it was a smoking gun per se, but I am a little disappointed that it took all of this legal wrangling to make these documents available to people.
Josh, am I playing devil's advocate by saying that it doesn't matter because those documents were written up and the speech came out prior to Chair Gensler taking the position in 2021? Does it matter?
So I think it does. And the reason that I think it does is a psychological refresh. Right? It's so easy to be like, yeah, I remember there was a speech in 2018 and, but to actually see, and I agree, like maybe it's not, there was no like secret, thing, but I do think it's a bright spot, especially now. And people can go back and say, look, there was a time when people were comfortable coming forward and saying, no, I feel confident that this, specifically Ether, should not be treated as current day sales should not be treated as securities transactions. And I think having that and being reminded just psychologically, it's important just to begin the discussion again about something that, we used to say, oh, the Hinman speech, but as you noted, it was back in 2018. Bringing it forward to 2023, I think is important.
I think it's helpful in context, but it's not the Rosetta Stone I think a lot of the crypto folks were looking for.
Well, look, I mean, the one thing I do think is it does rebut, a comment that Chair Gensler made in one of his hearings where, it's very clear what the law is, but then on the flip side, he wouldn't answer whether Ether was a commodity or a security.
Right. But the reason he couldn't or wouldn't answer that, I suspect, and David or Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, is because if he did define that, you finally give us a benchmark of what to measure up against for a token offering about a security.
And the last thing I'll just say is, I think we have to remember that he's not a lawyer. And, I think it's a different viewpoint on how you look at things. And things can be more binary and more black and white when you're not looking at sort of the shades of the legal review and just sort of taking an overall position on what you think things are.
Yeah.
Because I think the judiciary, even no matter how they find, I don't think any of the judiciary is going to say, oh, yeah, this was overwhelmingly a security or overwhelmingly not. And, I just think that there's going to be a lot of analysis that goes into any of these opinions that we read.
Yeah, there's this kind of bifurcated perspective that the chair takes on it. And I'm sorry, Josh, just real quickly. The reason I bring that up is, in in House testimony, the chair has noted, well, these are facts and circumstances when asked about specific tokens. But on the other hand, he can alternatively put forward a blanket statement that almost all crypto is a security without any kind of meshing of those two perspectives. If we're going to say facts and circumstances, give us the facts and circumstances in a particular instance. Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I agree with what you guys are saying. I think he just didn't want to turn out to be wrong because it is facts and circumstances. And no matter what he says, it's not for him to decide.
Yeah, fair point.
So I think that's part of it. But I do think it's important to remember the facts and circumstances. It's not just the facts and circumstances that are alleged one way. It goes both ways.
Yeah, fair point. What are you both looking for the coming week? It's a long 3-day weekend here in the United States for the Juneteenth federal holiday on Monday. Josh, what are you looking for in the coming week, as if you're not busy enough? And when you power up the private Gulfstream flying back from Vienna, I think you're at now?
I'm in Vienna right now, and on Sunday I'll be at Oxford for the Oxford Blockchain Conference, and then I'll be coming home. But I mean, one thing I'm really excited about, I have to double check the exact date, but is the event. I think you guys are speaking in it, both of you, the WSBA event. I can't wait to see that.
I think we're going to figure out getting you on the agenda as we discussed, Josh. So next Wednesday, for everyone in the audience at 1 p.m. Eastern time, we're doing our open global event, The Future of Crypto in America. David, Josh, I will be there, as well as several really smart panelists. It'll be a great series of conversations open to the public. Please share. It's available on LinkedIn as well. We'll get the social media machine cranking also. But yes, Josh, thanks for the shout out. It should be an interesting conversation. David, what about you? What are you looking for?
A couple of things. What happens in the Binance TRO case? As that evolves, is there some agreement on what remedies will be imposed on Binance, or is it something that the judge will have to rule on? I was pleased that they did not get a TRO against Binance straight away. I don't think that was the answer there. I'll be looking at price. Bitcoin saying over 25,000, 25,300 is an important price point. I won't go on all into the mechanics of it right now, but that's something I'm going to really be watching and see also, when there's less liquidity on the weekends, if we see some big moves in altcoins or crypto in general over the weekend, as there's less liquidity and susceptibility to bigger moves.
I'm going to spend a little bit of time trying to figure out in the coming week how Federal Reserve data and PPI and CPI do or don't affect crypto, because at this point, I don't think anyone has any particular idea, and I don't think the Fed policy knows where it's going. And I'll also be picking out the bottle of wine for the hopefully upcoming, at some point in the future, FTX book that's going to be published. We'll figure out where that's going as well. Pardon me as I lose my voice. Closing comments, Josh, David, thank you all for joining. Anything you both want to add?
I would just say that I think all of these charges and all of these allegations that have been made against projects and exchanges are affecting the market, and that we're seeing a decoupling of the NASDAQ from crypto, and it's something I'm really following and keeping track of, because if crypto were to recover and become more correlated with the NASDAQ, then I think we could see a nice run up in crypto, both in Bitcoin and altcoins. But right now, that's not happening.
Thank you both. We'll end it there. Thank you all for joining. We'll be back next week with more news. It's never boring. Thank you both, Josh, David. Safe travels, Josh. Good chatting with you.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.